Pull the string.
To evolve takes time. A year, a decade, a century. Some of us spend a lifetime and never uncover who we are. Rigid habits often dry into cemented weights, which for many is so easy to slip into. Pure pretense, no substance. Idle brains or stone hearts. Doesn't matter which one we lack for us to bear through the years. This was a poem written a while back in my book, actually, Requiem, the Space Between Words. I'd never titled that one, but as you can imagine, it's about people experiencing the passage of time. Which is the main topic that we're going to spend our time on talking about today. Measuring time from shadows to atomic clocks. This is episode 224 of SG2 on space. Now, you may be wondering what happened to the other person.
What other person? Hey, Shen.
Okay, here. This other person. What happened to your hat? Or fedora, or whatever you were wearing. No, it wasn't a fedora. News cap. Was it?
Another day.
Another day. All right. That would be a little too much, I suppose. Although maybe that doesn't exist for Leonard. Since I see you're wearing full peace pendants and a very nice red headband and flower shirt.
And my red shirt.
Yes. All right.
Hey, what did you want to talk about? What did you bring me out of stasis to do?
Okay,
today?
So Leonard was frozen in stasis for a little while, and he was just awoken from his long-term cryogenic sleep, right?
That's right.
But before we continue, let me just say this is SG2 on Space. If you like this, or like, subscribe, share. And I'm going to leave some ticker at the bottom running. Thank you for your support, Kyle Baker, Sam Welsh, and John Gray, for your donations. Now, of course, you can also go to patreon.com/SG2 on space if you want to support the show, or at least follow up on what is happening, announcements before watching the actual YouTube. So with all that said, today's episode, I woke Leonard from hibernation because not hibernation, stasis. Excuse me. But even that's definitely on another level. Because I want to talk about time, or rather how we measure time. Not so much like what is time, although we can get to that a bit later, but more like humans, interactions of like when we started timekeeping. Like back in the day, for instance, like it's so pivotal now, right? Like I was just on a phone call with a friend of mine, and she was trying to tell me some things, and I'm like, and then she was like, oh yeah, there's this event coming up, and I said, well, what time is it? And then she said, I don't know, I have to check. And then my thinking is, okay, I gotta look at my calendar. I gotta see what I'm doing during those, and if it fits. I mean, like we just do it so naturally these days. It's like, but there was a time in ancient times when that was it was not nearly so precise, right? So
that's right. I mean, so you're trying to say it's like something we take for granted, like timekeeping. We take it for granted today.
We do.
It's sort of built into our phones, computers. I think people's, like, I don't have it, but I think people's ovens and their thermostats and stuff like that are have timers and that kind of thing. But the story of how humans began measuring time and why they began measuring time is older and stranger and maybe more revealing than it might seem at first. So I guess what we like to do is try to trace that story from the beginnings in the prehistoric world, where people literally, we have evidence that people carved marks into bones, and they tried to do things like track the lunar cycle, all the way to today. The technology developed through atomic, and there's even nuclear clocks today that are accurate to billionths of a second. So along that way, I guess I'd like to maybe we can explore how timekeeping is evolved out of human needs like agriculture and religious rituals and navigation. But also, kind of how it shaped entire civilizations and, our way of life, capitalism, our economies, and even our ways of thinking. So maybe we can look at how time went from being something observed in nature primarily to like today we have it's mechanical, kind of regulated, evenly digitized down to the second.
Indeed. You want to talk about the Ishango bone?
Yes. So these are two artifacts, right? And these have to do with cultural and religious differences, and that kind of thing. But before there were clocks or calendars or even writing, people still needed to somehow keep track, or they observed periodic things that were going on in their world. And there's two artifacts. Well, actually, I was able to find. I did some research and I found 5 artifacts that all date to more than 10,000 years ago, and they are something called a Shango bone. And
look at that. That thing.
Oh yeah, excellent. Yeah. So
what is it?
Well, I think it's a monkey bone. It's a monkey bone, and somebody carved notches on it. Somebody was putting notches on there, and many scholars think that they were able to find some traces to lunar cycles. And I'm also thinking, I didn't see this mentioned, but one of the periodic things that humans observe all the time is menstruation. Most of these books are written by men, and so they don't really pay any attention to that. But in ancient times, people certainly observed that, and it happens that the menstrual cycle is 29 days, which is about the same as the lunar cycle. So that's pretty mysterious. So anyway, these artifacts aren't exactly clocks as we think of them, but they represent a deep human impulse to find these patterns in nature and impose some kind of structure on time.
That is really interesting. And what was the there was another bone as well, right? That was discovered, Blanchard bone.
Well, one of the ones that popped out was called the Blanchard bone, and I think it came from Europe. The Ishango bone is from Africa, and it dates to 20 to 25,000 years ago. This Blanchard bone is a similar kind of thing. I think it's also a bone, and it's got these little dots that appear to be pictures of the moon, or at least some people have interpreted it that way. And it curves around and back and forth and so forth.
This thing, look at that.
Yeah, it's cool.
Blanchard bone. I mean, that looks mysterious. It looks like an astronomical symbol or thing.
So if you look at it carefully, you'll see some notches along the top, and actually you can't see it in this one, but along the bottom. And it's thought that somebody put a string or some sinew across there, and they were able to line up. It had some function, right, which is mysterious. Now I've seen that interpretation, that sort of cartoon interpretation.
Oh, this one about is this like the moon? What is this?
Yeah, and well, we'll accept what the experts say that is. I don't necessarily see it in the bone itself, but I don't have the artifact to actually examine. So we'll stipulate that that's what the experts that were looking at this were able to see. So
I don't imagine anyone could just go touch this prehistoric thing and then try to figure it out.
Actually, I've read that they're very fragile, and they're not. It's hard to get to them to examine. So I guess you need to write a proposal and have some credentials.
Oh, yeah, one of those things where you actually have
yeah.
You look at it, and then it's clearly that it's demarcating the passage of something, right? So
so it's interesting. So early humans would have been attuned to those kind of cycles, the moon seasons, migrations of animals, and also they undoubtedly knew of this, saw the same kind of things that we see. Actually, they saw it better because they were outdoors, and and they didn't have they didn't have a television to watch, keep them occupied all the time. So they observed the lengthening and shortening of days. The point is that in prehistory, and really all the way up until probably about the Middle Ages, time was embedded in nature and it wasn't yet separated or abstract. And so that touches on cultural and religious differences, like how some civilizations viewed time as cyclical, while others and some singular civilizations develop an idea that time is a linear thing. It goes from a beginning to an end, and that distinction still matters today. Let me say that again.
Are we?
In ancient time.
Okay, sorry. Go. You're saying. Okay. Well, you're gonna say it again anyway, so I'm not going to interrupt you. Go on.
Okay, but I mean, it's okay, and I mean, like it's supposed to be a conversation,
okay.
and I'm working on myself, to actually have a conversation. So.
Well, I mean, when you're expounding on something, but then you're saying, hey, like, okay, so you're going to reemphasize the fact that there's a difference in perspective. Like, this is not just like the actual measurement of time. It's like the perspective on time between a purely linear from past, present, future versus a cyclical approach where everything that's happening in the future will just it's like a recycled past, and it just
So in prehistoric times, perhaps the time to hunt, so we have a time to hunt. Well, that's when the buffalo come. Okay, so we go to hunt, right? Whereas our culture, it's like, it's quitting time. I got to go home, right? So you look at you look at your phone these days. So that it's an important distinction, and maybe we'll get into that as our conversation proceeds. So and so it's like what does it mean to live by the clock? Have we gained precision at the cost of something more human or something more integral to nature? And why did mechanical timekeeping emerge in the first place when some cultures, some other cultures have kind of resisted mechanical timekeeping introduction?
Even to this very day, if you look at different societies, some societies take a very precise notion to like, okay, everything has to be right on time,
right?
Or something like,
yeah.
Like this. And you can see it in all sorts of things, like even like how they handle meetings, or like is the train on time. And then other places in the world, it's like people take a very lax approach to it. Like,
right. Yes. I even noticed that, there's a generational difference. I've noticed that the boomer generation that I came out of, we put a premium on being on time, having a good appearance, showing up on time, and and so forth. Okay, but maybe we don't want to go.
Can we go back and start from the beginning again? So we talked. I mean, I don't. We can talk about sociological things in a little bit. But I do want to talk about like the early astronomical observations, such as like what happened. What was that? Stonehenge.
Yes. Well, Stonehenge, but even before Stonehenge, there is a structure in Ireland, and it's called the Newgrange.
It doesn't seem nearly as well known as Stonehenge.
It's not as well known, but it's phenomenal. There's like this amazing thing that occurs there, and what it is it's a Neolithic, about 5,200 years ago, and it predates Stonehenge and the Egyptian pyramids. Okay, and so what's distinctive about it's a circular mound that was built with about 200,000 tons of stone and earth, and inside it must have been some kind of tomb of some sort. But inside, there's two passages that kind of cross each other, and so there's inner passages, and the walls are all decorated with Neolithic carvings and spirals and stuff. But the most remarkable feature about it is totally cool. It's a precise alignment with the winter solstice at sunrise. Once a year, the sunlight penetrates a tiny opening above the entrance, and it's called the roof box, and it illuminates the inner chamber in a stunning display that lasts just a few minutes.
Let me show a picture of this.
Yeah, if you can find something on the internet. Yeah.
It looks beautiful.
Yeah, I think that's on my list of things to visit. And
wow, Ireland's ancient. It's 5,200 years old. Okay.
Yeah. So this kind of, this sets the scene. These weren't just for observation. They had some social and religious meaning, but the time apparently was like the idea that time, the position of the sun and the time that thing occurred was a sacred symbol. And it was, and people were tied to the sky and the earth. And and maybe you could say in prehistoric times, time wasn't something that you measured so much as something that you lived inside of it. So now,
you say in prehistoric times, people didn't care so much about the exact measurement of time, but they were very much aware of time because it was so pivotal to their life.
That's right. So they observe. That's what I think. I mean, I propose that's true. They didn't have this cyclical. They didn't have this, this precise notion that we have, mainly because they didn't have that capability. I might say we'll get into that later. But so the other one that I identified was called the Nabta Playa, and it's located in southern Egypt in a place called the Nubian Desert.
How do you spell that?
It's Nabta Playa.
Nabta Playa. Yeah, found it.
Nabta Playa.
And this is even more ancient.
This is even more ancient. This is like 6,000 years ago.
I can't like the only thing I've heard of is Stonehenge, but clearly I haven't done sufficient research.
Stonehenge is new by this.
Yeah, wow.
So
people have been building these ancient like stone structures for a while now.
Yeah, I mean, so that's what's cool about it. And there's some very primitive kind of, I guess, crude stones that have been erected at that site. And on one of the stone, there's a stone circle, and it's referred to as Africa's Stonehenge. And it's thought to,
right?
Yeah. So there's a certain set of stones that align with the summer solstice, just like that thing just like the tomb in Ireland, and it aligns with the summer solstice, and also with some of the key stars in the Orion's belt. The constellation of Orion seems to be very important to the ancient Egyptians, and these are sort of pre-Egyptian Egyptians from the southern part of Egypt. So it stands as a testament to early humans' capacity to observe, measure, and celebrate the cosmos. And so the thing I wanted to underscore about all of this is the prehistoric artifacts and these structures that it's sort of the rhythms of nature that shape daily life, but they didn't have the need to really divide the hours from divide the day into hours or minutes and minutes into seconds.
So, okay. The structures were very important from the astronomical, like the longer time, I guess, just tracking it throughout the year, right?
Yes, I think so. I mean, I think I can imagine, it's just in my own imagination and what I've read from scholars of this subject, but it kind of makes sense.
You call this perspective the experiential time versus measure time.
Yeah, I think that's what we're talking about. So, but as this, from the Egyptians and the Europeans and also civilizations all around the world started to emerge at this time, which is sort of a mystery all by itself. Like modern humans have been around for around 200 or maybe over 200,000 years. And then in the last 10,000 years, within the last 10,000 years, they started to build civilizations all over the world. I don't want to say all at once, but
all of this, like these different human, you would expect them to develop at different times, but somehow they all seem to coincide around the same time.
In a certain respect, civilization emerged in many different parts all over the earth at the same time.
That's such a mystery.
So that is a mystery, and you know, if you doubt that, I mean, you might say, well, you know, the civilizations were in contact and it spread from one place to another, but in the Western Hemisphere, civilizations like the Maya and the Aztec and the Incas all emerged from the Stone Age, right? They were not influenced by cultures in the unless you want to get into like ancient astronauts and all that stuff. So
I mean, that can wait. I don't want to talk about that. Although I do like talking about the weird. But let's go with the main thing.
Yeah, well, while we're at it, you know, that show, Ancient Astronauts, it's actually one of my favorite shows.
Oh, it is?
Yeah.
I thought you would be disparaging everything they have on there. But
well, I mean, the idea that there's ancient astronauts, I certainly disparage that. But I mean, it's an interesting show. I mean, they do a good job of you know, showing different things. You know,
you heard it. I mean, from the archaeological perspective, they do a lot of in-depth talk about it.
I agree. Okay. So, but then, you know, as civilizations grew more complex, then the timekeeping needed to be more structured, and it started to become, you know, sort of an essential. So agricultural societies, when we developed agriculture, you needed to predict seasonal changes, schedule plantings, harvesting, coordinate large scale religious activities and civic activities. So ancient Egypt was a particularly in need of this. So in ancient Egypt, they developed sundials and shadow clocks, and they began to divide the day into smaller parts. And then they invented these things called water clocks, and the water clock is called.
So you don't want to touch on Egyptian sundials?
I am. I'm gonna the sundials. I'm touching on the sundials, but we started to really be able to divide the night up. You know, you needed some kind of mechanical means, and the Egyptians appear to have invented a device called the clepsydra, and it offered a way to track time.
How do you spell that?
CLEP.
Wow, clepsydra.
Yeah, and these have been found.
Oh, sorry, that's one example. All right, go on.
And what it works on the principle of having a water reservoir that you keep at a constant level, and then you tap off a little bit of that in order to fill a bucket, you know, or fill a cup on a balance. And then when the cup filled up, then the balance would turn over, and then a certain amount of time had gone by. And so this really was a kind of way of tracking through the night, and even offering a kind of an alarm clock that could wake you up at midnight or
from 1391 to 1353 BC. So that's quite a while.
Yeah, that's Bronze Age. Okay, so that was kind of the first mechanical kind of idea about tracking time, especially at night, which is sometimes difficult. Although the ancients would have had the stars, and they would have been very much more intimately have much more intimate understanding of the constellations and where a star belonged during the night. The Babylonians developed the base 60 numbering system, so that's why we have 360 degrees in our circle and 60 minutes in our hours, and somehow that echoes today. That seems to we've retained that from
we're still using 60 seconds in a minute, 60 minutes in an hour.
Yeah.
So, where's that? I mean,
and
that was just arbitrary on their part.
No, 60 is a good number because you can divide it by a lot of different things. You can divide it by 2, you can divide it by 3, you can divide it by 5. You know, you can divide it by 4. Okay, so and then that's where the 360-degree circle came from, because it also, so it's a nice numbering system that's easily divisible, evenly divisible by a lot of integers. So
Yeah, that
that
makes sense.
that was what was going on there.
So
Especially being able to divide by 3.
You're saying the ancient Babylonians, when they kept it was when they kept track of time, they used like 60 and 20 and 12, and we
Yeah,
stuff using we're still doing that today.
and we're still doing that today. They invented the 60-minute hour and so forth. So, but and then on the other side of the earth, completely independently, the Mayans had a fairly sophisticated calendars that tracked like 2 interleaved kind of periodicities for the purpose of, well, really they had religious connotation or religious implications, and so they invented these cosmological cycles. China too. They had complex calendar systems that guided like the rituals and the political legitimacy.
You know what's interesting is that
Tell me.
I mean, like growing up, my parents always had these lunar calendars. Like you can get them from any Chinese store, really. They just hand them out, and we just hung them, and they have all the Chinese holidays depicted based on the lunar calendar, you know, and
Yeah,
mark things with different. I don't know. I looked at it briefly, but
there's a zodiac. There's a Chinese zodiac. You know, it's like the year of the. Are we in a year of the dog or year of the chicken, or do you know, year of the roundworm?
What is the Chinese? You know,
year of the malaria parasite.
It's a snake, sir.
The year of the snake. Okay.
Yeah. Wood snake, to be precise. So Chinese, what I was talking about earlier is the lunar calendar based on each month, yes, but also like over each year, the Chinese years, every 12 years, like there's a cycle of animals. And also every 60 years, there's a cycle of elements. So Chinese alchemy has 5 different elements. And so this year is technically not just snake, it's also wood snake. So wood is one of the 5 elements. So if I knew more about Chinese astrology, I could tell you what that means. Like it probably implies a bunch of things happening this year, but I don't.
Okay, well, that's fine. I mean, but you know, the point is that here we have this other culture in China where the time was deeply intertwined with, you know, rituals and as it happens, also political legitimacy in some sense. So it was intertwined with power. Calendars were often guarded. My research, you know, kind of indicated that the calendars were guarded and controlled by priesthoods or royal astronomers, and the ability to predict eclipses or seasonal shifts could reinforce a ruler's divine authority. So if you have this special power, you know, to be able to predict when there was going to be a lunar or solar eclipse, I mean, that's actually played up in some fictional accounts, like
it is interesting how that comes about when the celestial phenomenon is, well, back in the day, like you know, there wasn't a distinguishment between, you know, I mean, there was, people thought what was happening up there had a direct impact on what is
right. That's what, that's
like a universal thing. Like, oh yeah, what's going on in the heavens is definitely affecting what's here. So
yeah, timekeeping wasn't merely a practical thing; it was like a cosmological thing.
Exactly.
You know? And so there wasn't that much interest in measuring in abstract units, but about aligning our lives with the heavens and the cosmological things that were going on. So that's actually kind of interesting. That I'm not sure. I guess I kind of like that in a way, you know. So
I mean, nowadays it's like you tell people, "Hey, there's an eclipse happening," or you know, some other astronomical phenomenon, and most people have no idea. They don't care about it. They don't
care. You know,
like,
no, I've seen it. You know, you can look at that stuff on the internet anyway. Yeah. So why should I get up? You know,
I mean, I'm sure, like in the ancient days, you know, it may be like the average peasant farmer didn't care, but definitely the ruling class would, since that was highly linked. So yeah.
So time had so I guess to put a bow on this little discussion, time had a sacred dimension. But even as it became more regular and coordinated, the timekeeping became coordinated across growing empires. So so actually, I guess about aligning human life with the heavens, calendars and timekeeping systems weren't just focused on counting time as a series of identical interchangeable slices like hours, minutes, and seconds, but instead on keeping human activities synchronized with the observable cosmic rhythms that were believed to have meaning or power, right? So it is kind of that is kind of like a woo-woo kind of thing. So I had three examples. Like the Egyptian civil calendar was based on the rising of Sirius and the flooding of the Nile. The flooding of the Nile was very important to the ancient Egyptians. It was a periodic thing, and it was tied to their survival because that was the time that they needed to be prepared to plant. So it aligned up with religious ceremonies that regulated.
In a way, I mean, like, so it wasn't entirely just due to this notion of like some sacred nature. It was also practical as well, like, because
it was practical because
early civilizations, regardless of where you are, like Mesopotamia, Egypt, China, like they were all very agrarian. There you go.
Yeah.
And so when to plant your crops and when to harvest them is extremely important, and that's highly tied to what was going up in the skies.
Yeah, that underscores very much with what I was trying to say here. The Mayan calendar system also, as I mentioned, tracks like multiple overlapping cycles. There was some kind of 260-day cycle, and then that was interleaved with a 365-day cycle, and then
they have like the Mayans. They're the ones who take that. They have like multiple calendars, right? Where there's like short and long cycles.
Exactly.
Like some people were like having weird conspiracy theories about, I think, what was it, like 2012 or something, when one of the Mayan cycles was ending.
That's right. So one of those cycles was ending, and it was supposed to be in 2012, and then somebody said, no, we're off by a year. It's going to be 2013, and then the world didn't end in 2013 either. And
although, maybe the same people who think about ancient astronauts, I've read some things online where some people think that 2012 did end the world and we're just living in this post-extended simulated state, which I'm not going to get into.
Okay, pseudoscience. Okay, so whatever you, I'm right. Whatever you observe fits my theory.
Yeah. But I think going back to this is that like these ancient civilizations, like say the Mayans, developed very complicated calendar systems, and based on these, what they observed in the skies. And technically, I mean, you could it just goes on forever, right? So like theirs is like the approach in time there is like a cyclical approach where things they don't never really end. It just
that actually seems to be very common in human civilization or in human culture. So time isn't something you could that you could separate from nature or break into neutral units like we do today. So time was was purposeful, had some tie to meaning, especially religious and agricultural meaning. So it's only later now with the mechanical clocks that we began to abstract time into fixed regular intervals.
Mechanical clocks, I guess, started in like the Middle Ages with
that's right, yeah.
In both China as well as the Middle East, I suppose.
Well, I mean, mechanical time, this idea that the earliest mechanical clocks appeared in European monasteries in the 13th and 15th century. Yeah, right. and it had to do with the invention of something called an escapement mechanism, and I don't know exactly what it was, but it's something that's rocking back and forth and would cause a gear to turn a little at a time. It wasn't a pendulum. Pendulums were later applied to that. And actually the word clock comes from the word in French for, and I don't know how to pronounce it in French, clocher.
I don't know
which is
French at all.
the word for bell. That's the word for bell, because the monasteries needed to wake up at night to pray or something. And
so in a way, that was like, hey, we need to more precisely measure time. We can't just say like, okay, tonight,
right,
whatever. When the
right, and
we're gonna do this. No, we
and
have to
and
track it.
yeah, and in the Christian civilization, okay, and I'm going to get into this and probably maybe say some provocative things in a few moments.
Yeah. Well, what are we but always saying provocative things?
in this Christian conception, there wasn't any objection to using a mechanism to tell time. Okay, but it turns out that in other cultures there was an aversion to that, to the presentation of mechanical clocks to tell time. Sort of got in the way of the idea that people are inside of time and that the world is regulating their activities, and the monks in these monasteries didn't have that hang up.
Yeah, wait. I think you're saying here that some people in like secular society or whatever, but back in the day, you're saying they thought like, well, if you're telling time to that level, you're not actually like it's not within our humans to be able to dictate to that.
Yes,
degree.
That's right. Yeah, but these monasteries, these religious leaders in Europe at that time didn't have that hang up. They weren't thinking along that, and there's a particular reason. There's a real reason for that. So the invention of these clocks in the 13th and 14th century, they didn't have hands on them. They just rang bells, right? They just struck bells at regular intervals, and so it was time. But the idea had started, and so for the first time in history, time could be divided into equal, continuous units, regardless of what was happening in the sky or the seasons or the rivers, and so forth. And that I'm going to propose was a revolution in thinking. And so
in a way, it's like we don't really. I mean, I don't typically think about that as a revolution, but it really is, right?
It is, and the fact that that's what everyone all over the world today does. Meaning they look at their watch, or they look at their cell phone for what time it is, and when it is time to do something, is a invention of the medieval Europe.
Even this show, like I don't use a mechanical clock to say, hey, we're going to start the show at around 1:30.
Well, you don't. We start the time when Shen shows up.
So, oh my gosh! Oh my god! All right. Let's. Thanks. Hey, this picture. I don't know if you know much about it. Is this just a abstract drawing of it, or is there something?
I haven't seen that picture before, but that must be it doesn't have any there. Well, it does have hands on the clock.
Yeah, it's like
hey, this certainly looks like something like what I'm referring to.
So this is interesting. Also, many other late medieval nova repertoire, including the paper, printing, gunpowder, and the compass. All those originated in China, by the way. Oh, it says that. The mechanical clock was invented and developed almost entirely in Europe. Wow. So
yeah,
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So it's like normally I don't think of the European Middle Ages as being very inventive about anything, but I guess
that's right. But the clock, they did that. This is a thing in the clock. They didn't have any hang up about telling time mechanically, and so it's actually what I was going to say about that was
this is really interesting.
There is a deeper question lurking behind the appearance and spread of mechanical time. We're going to call it mechanical time. Why did it occur in Europe? Why Why Europe and why then? And so
Well,
one,
yeah, okay, sorry, you're going to answer that question apparently, so I'm going to stop
it's a
it there.
rhetorical question. I was going to answer, but I'm open to your answer.
Okay. I mean, I don't
And
know.
then I'll tell you the right answer.
I haven't done nearly as much research as you, but I imagine, like you said, it is partly uh, the view of, you know, having to keep track of when to do those prayers. Another aspect may be the fact that well, I'm reading in this paragraph right now that there are certain parts of Europe where they couldn't use the water clocks that were common in, say, the Middle East or China, because in Northern Europe, those water clocks would just freeze in the winter, and so they wouldn't be able to use them.
Well, I know, but you can keep them warm because the people had to keep warm also. So
Okay, so tell me the reason. Why?
it's a deep question. All right. And so one possibility, and this is one that it's not just me coming up with this, but historians and philosophers have long wrestled with this actually. And it's that there is something in the Judeo-Christian worldview, and especially the Christian conception of time, that made Western Europe uniquely receptive to the idea of linear, autonomous time. And so, what could that be? So, if you'll allow me, and you don't,
Let's hear it out.
Okay, in Christianity, time has a beginning. So, the whole creed of Christianity, Judaism and Christianity, is that in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and it moves forward with purpose toward an end, which is in the particular case a final judgment and renewal of creation.
Right.
Time is directional, meaningful, and finite. But more than that, there is a theological assumption rooted especially in medieval scholasticism. That's, you know, like the smart people in the Middle Ages, that the world is. Are you ready? Ready?
I mean, I have a feeling you know what I know what you're gonna say. I mean,
That the world,
so
once it was created by God. Now this is the this is the mythology, okay? Continues to run according to a consistent, rational set of laws, like a cosmic machine. So from the medieval Christian point of view, God is not constantly intervening to sustain every moment, as in some Islamic or Eastern conceptions, but has endowed creation with order and autonomy. That's a metaphysical picture of a rational, law-governed universe, may have created a fertile ground for mechanical timekeeping to emerge and spread. It made sense to measure time in regular autonomous units because time itself was imagined to unfold that way. In contrast, okay, cultures that saw time as cyclical or dependent on divine will, moment to moment, may have found mechanical timekeeping alien or even threatening. And so this could explain why the clock, once invented, spread rapidly and enthusiastically in Europe while being viewed with suspicion or limited use in parts of the Islamic world and in East Asia. So now I know this is like a speculation, but it raises fascinating questions about how our deepest metaphysical assumptions shape even the tools that we use to mark the passing of a day.
that is interesting. You put it that way. How
You're okay? Are you still with me? Has everybody shut me off now? I don't know. Maybe.
why would they shut you off? I mean, like you're
Well,
explaining the perspective. Like now, this is just one view, right? There's not really. I mean, this is a theory, like, or is it? I mean, right? Like,
I don't know. I'm offering it as a proposal, as something that I've read about and thought about. So time was no longer, if time is no longer embedded in nature, it becomes something that humans can create and control, ticking forward mechanically. And so because the world behaves that way, and actually that's widespread today, but in ancient times and not so ancient times, hundreds of years ago, um, you know, people didn't think that, right? So
yeah.
as the clock spread to town squares and later into homes, they brought with them a new way of thinking time as a universal grid, right? So we're gridding time. And it's no coincidence that this shift coincided with trade, banking, urban life, and later industrial capitalism.
Okay. That is interesting. And like Huh. Yeah.
Huh.
I will have to read up some more on that. But
Okay.
let us continue with
Well,
the.
I was gonna say, I was gonna even be more provocative. Maybe it's not provocative. Maybe it's like people are all asleep
You,
now.
you
I don't
just said
know.
this perspective on the Judeo-Christian sort of
Yeah.
perspective on time. Like it's not, you didn't come up with this. I mean, this is a theory
No,
that's
I didn't.
floating around.
This is, I guess, the first place I read about it was a guy named Bernard Lewis, who was talking about Islamic civilization. But I've considered it. I've seen it also reckoned in other books. But if we take the idea that mechanical, timekeeping expresses a particular worldview, one sees that time as linear, progressive, and measurable. It raises the question about how the other great civilizations conceived of time. So, in particular, this guy Bernard Lewis. And he actually may be canceled. I have no idea. I really don't know who's canceled and who's not. And I'm probably canceled now. And the reason I say that is because
Good
there's
point.
a you don't want to all there's a there's a there's a zeitgeist, a worldwide zeitgeist, a notion that all cultures are equal, right? So no culture can be better than another culture, right? But and so and if there was some kind of invention like a clock that was then later eventually grabbed a hold of and taken all over the world and changed the way the whole world worked, that couldn't be because of some characteristics of the culture, right? That had to have been an accident, right? So I guess I'm trying to be brave enough to say that it wasn't an accident. It was an attribute of the ideology that was in the creed, in that religious creed, which held that
I mean,
that the universe was created that way, that it's running mechanically, and that it runs mechanically and autonomously by itself. And that's an offense to some people. That's offensive to other cultures, in particular the Islamic culture. While astronomy and mathematics were highly advanced, there was often
algebra
theological.
comes from that, and most of the stars in our sky are named after from their
Absolutely.
origins.
Absolutely. There's, you can't take anything away from them. Also, they preserved a lot of the ancient um, um,
The Greek
um,
writings in Rome.
writings and so forth where that was absent. And so we owe them that. Okay, but there was a resistance to the idea of the world operating independently of divine will. Okay, so the dominant view among many Islamic theologians, especially in the 11th century, was that God is creating the world at every moment. And even today, you will hear, if you have friends who are Islamic, and about people in Islamic countries, they're always citing God as making something happen. God,
I mean,
and
but
it fills up their language, right?
like if you're a Christian, though, you frequently would do that too. Like you would say, like,
Some
you
Yes,
know,
some Christians will say that, okay, but the dominant idea in Christianity is that the world was created and it runs. The world was created. It's a good thing, right? And it runs autonomously. It's not, and that from time to time God will enter this and change things and so forth. So, but the idea that God makes the world at every moment, so that every moment that passes by is held up and created anew at every moment, and that the causation, the idea that one moment causes the next moment, is an illusion, right? I think that many Muslim intellectuals would agree with that. That I think that's the case. So this is called voluntarism, meaning not voluntary, but meaning it's the idea that the will of God is holding the world up at every moment. And so they discourage the idea that natural laws unfold predictably. And so there was resistance when mechanical clocks started to become integrated into the daily life. in Europe, there was resistance in the Muslim and Islamic culture to that, and eventually by the end of the 18th century, 19th century, they got with the program and said, yeah, okay, it's just a tool, right? But there was theological reasons for not wanting to have clocks, right? China, the other example would be like in China, that things are much more complicated. Chinese developed highly advanced astronomical instruments and some mechanical devices in the 11th century, water-powered astronomical clock tower.
I actually have a whole book on Chinese inventions, and I think that's definitely in there.
That's in there, yeah. But the Chinese conception of time was, as we were just discussing, cyclical, and it's weirdly tied to dynasties. You know, you always hear about the various dynastic rhythms.
I mean, not necessarily, but yeah, I do agree with you on the traditional perspective in a cyclical nature.
Cosmological balance and harmony of heaven and earth. The imperial calendar was a political instrument closely guarded by the state. Timekeeping served to express cosmic order and reinforce social hierarchy. So to break time into universally standard, so the purpose was not to break time into like hours, minutes, and seconds. So the idea of that a clock ran autonomously, independent of cosmic rhythms, may have seemed. I mean, I don't think the Chinese were as off-put by it as Islamic civilization, but there was a little bit of slowness to come to terms with that. And India was in sort of the same kind of. And if you ever go to a Hindu temple, right?
I have been to
there's just all of this imagery about cycles and things turning and everything having to do, and it never really occurred to me very much how important that was, but that really does have the idea that things turn around or that everything is cyclical. India, like China, was not quite as resistant as Islamic culture, but it did seem to go in more slowly, and certainly not as enthusiastically as it was taken up in Europe. And I'm open to being, somebody, try not to curse at me in the comments, but
I mean, I don't find anything you're saying that controversial. You're basically just saying, hey, like the mechanical clock and this kind of like discrete approach to measuring time appeared in Europe because of the Judeo-Christian beliefs, and it didn't quite grab on in these other places in the world, other civilizations, because that same perspective did not apply. In other words, these other
that's right. I think that's what I'm trying to say. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not like saying there's any. I don't know what the controversy would be. I mean, the only thing would be like, oh yeah, well,
I don't know in China and India, Buddhist, Hindu, Buddhist, and the Shinto and
that's Buddhism.
Confucian.
Oh, wait,
Confucian.
That's Japanese.
That's Japanese. In those traditions, the idea of a cyclical thing happening, and so it didn't impair the adoption of mechanical time. First of all, I have to say, mechanical time is all over the world. Everyone around the world finds it practical and finds it useful. Nobody finds it, blasphemous. Right. But the Islamic culture in particular has this voluntarist theology that the world is being held up at every moment by the will of God, and so it can go in any direction at any time. And so the idea that you have a mechanism that's tracking it has a tendency to put it in a category which is also sort of blasphemous. So that's what I'm saying. All right.
Okay.
So
that may be your. I don't know if it's controversial, but that may be.
Yeah.
If anything's controversial, that is what
that is yeah that I propose that is bordering on the polemical, okay, concerning that society. And all cultures are supposed to be equivalent. No culture is better than any other culture. Okay.
I will my perspective on this, and then let's get back to actually time out measurement time. I don't. You could say every culture is the same as every other, but we know that's not true. But there's also not really a demarcation saying like this culture is superior to another because of so and so. I mean, like
we don't say that. Yeah, we don't say that, but that's just because of our ideology. There's nothing.
Every culture brings something to the table. I mean, like what I just read, like the mechanical clock was invented in Europe, but around the Middle Ages, like obviously paper came from China, and so it's like great. Like who's to say like what? I mean, that revolutionized everything for everyone.
Every culture brings something to the table. The Aztecs, for example, they brought human sacrifice on massive scales to us as a means of assuring that the rains come every year. So every culture is, and no culture is better than any other culture.
Well, the Aztecs they were also their city. They built literally like a floating city, and they had like amazing like irrigation and I don't know, some kind of engineering in order to create all those buildings, like and be able to float them on.
And if it wasn't for 50,000 captives being being sacrificed to the rain god every year, think how far back they would be. Anyway, I hope the biting sarcasm has filtered through. Right. So among tribal and indigenous societies, time is often experienced not as a linear sequence, but a web of events tied to natural cycle stories and the land itself.
Let's go back to, since we are like we've talked about a bunch of things, but can we go back and talk about clocks and like capitalism, factory whistles?
Yeah, we're getting to that. We're getting that.
And we also have a question from, I don't know who R&B is, but do you want to answer it?
I don't see the question. What is the question?
Do you think time is a fundamental aspect of the universe, or is a human construct used to organize our experience?
Well, I think that's kind of an interesting question. I think the way we're using mechanical clocks, that's to organize our experience. But certainly time is a fundamental aspect because we have the second law of thermodynamics, which we can talk about another time. And there is an arrow. There is a certain arrow to time.
Yeah. We will talk about
R&B girl.
The second law of thermodynamics. We will talk about another time. And in that, if you look at it, the whole physical world does flow in one direction, which would indicate that, at least macroscopically, there is time, like even without humans like measuring it. Like before humans existed, there was time.
Yes, I think that's right. Yeah. Stephen Hawking thought that time began at the Big Bang. So, anyway, I think it's a really good question, and I'm really happy that question came up.
So we can touch more in depth in another episode about the physics aspect of it. But let's talk about what I just said: factory whistles, punch cards. What's going on there? Like at some point, things got
let's see. So I guess to put the bow on that last discussion there, that if you think the world is orderly and created by a rational lawgiver, then the clock becomes a kind of metaphor for that orderly creation. So that was what I wanted to say. But with the scientific revolution, the timekeeping took on new precision and new urgency. So let's see. We know about Galileo. We talked about Galileo.
We talked about Galileo a lot.
He did experiments with pendulums. What a pendulum is. And he laid the groundwork for vastly more accurate clocks. So by the middle of the 1600s, there was I guess a physicist or scientist named Christian Huygens, and he built the first successful pendulum.
Dutch.
I think he was. Yeah, I think he was Dutch, right? I don't have a biography of him, but
it's okay.
He's well known.
He patents the first pendulum clock. Who would have? Oh, I love his hair, by the way. Here,
accurate to within. Yeah, that's a. Yeah, he looks great like. Yeah, Robert Plant, I think. In the Led Zeppelin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here. Well, I mean, Christian Huygens existed first, I guess.
That's quite a mane on him. Yeah, awesome.
He invented this little thing.
Accurate to within seconds per day, and it was a stunning leap forward. It wasn't just a technical marvel; it was a tool that made possible a new kind of science.
Mechanical clocks in the Middle Ages, but centuries before this, they only measured up to the minute, right? Maybe.
Yeah, minute. Yes, yeah. They were not accurate to within. Yeah, they were accurate to within minutes, and they could be set because you could reset them to the sun, and so forth. All right, but the main thing in the medieval clocks was to get through the night, basically, right? Or get through a cloudy days. Right. So, but this was a true mechanical clock, and was accurate to within a few seconds per day, and it wasn't just a technical. So this was a tool that made possible a new kind of science that so nature operates according to laws, like falling bodies at a certain rate, and those laws can now be with an accurate clock. You can observe them and measure them in real time. So regular mechanical time became a foundation of physics, navigation, and engineering. Think about that. I mean, if I can now measure time to a high precision, then I can start to understand a lot of things. And one of the big problems was, maybe you've heard of this, the longitude problem. You know about
remind me. I think that's
longitude problem. Sailors could calculate latitude really easily. If you can see the North Star and measure the angle above the horizon and other stars, you can calculate what latitude you're at, right? Very easily. But determining longitude requires the orientation of the Earth in the reference frame, and that means that because the Earth is rotating. I know some people don't think the Earth rotates, and
let's not go with forget. Take the scientifically considered mainstream approach here. All right. So
okay, yeah, I'm pretty sure that the Earth is round because I've talked to people on the other side of the Earth, and they have to go to bed. They have to go to sleep when I'm waking up. But that's sort of an aside there. But determining longitude requires knowing the exact time at a known reference point at sea, and then once you know the exact time at a known reference point, then you can look at the stars, right, to find out where you are in longitude. Okay, but and then using pendulum clocks are absolutely useless on a boat.
Why?
Right.
Yeah.
Why? Because the boat is doing this, right?
Okay. Wow, that's making me dizzy now. Stop.
Yeah. Right. So the pendulum clocks don't work, and so the British government they set out a prize, like a political an award for anyone who could come up with a marine chronometer. A marine clock capable of keeping time aboard a rolling ship, and it became like a big deal. It was kind of like I don't know. I can't think of anything like it that we have today, other than the
20,000 pounds, about
20,000
pounds today for a practical useful method to determine longitude to an accuracy of ½ degree. That's incredible.
Yeah, I think that's what I read. 20,000 pounds, and today that would be millions. That would be millions of dollars. And this prize was established in 1714 the British Parliament, they established this thing called the Longitude Act, and so it offered this government-sponsored prize for innovation. And so actually, the U.S. government does that with the space stuff. That's how, like fixed price contracts on things and different sorts of things. So the longitude problem was one of the great scientific and navigational challenges of the 17th and 18th century. While sailors could determine latitude, as I say, by looking at the angle of the sun and stars above the horizon, figuring out your east-west position was trickier for the reasons that I just explained. And so you need to know the exact time. So this was addressed by
Harrison. This guy.
Harrison.
Sorry, I'm reading this.
Yeah, that's fine.
John Harrison, who was a carpenter and was poor, didn't even have a clock, but he made one.
He wasn't college educated. He was sort of self-taught. He was a carpenter. He made clocks, and he eventually won the prize. Although he had to spend decades or many years trying to get the prize paid out. He spent decades working on the solution, creating a series of increasingly sophisticated marine timekeepers. And I think he had like pendulums that would bounce back and forth, or something like that. I really don't know the
specifics of what kind of clock he made. You're not quite sure about.
I'm not precisely sure about the technology, but I think he had suspended pendulums that would bounce, that would vibrate. Large
genius. I mean, take a look at this thing.
It was called the H4.
Look at that. Well, he made a bunch of H1s. This was an H1. I guess he made some others. H2, H3, H4. It looks so intricate.
It looks pretty cool. I want one. I want one for my steam.
Yeah, he did. The first one he made was a H1, and then he set out to give it a trial. I need that. I need that for my steampunk guard. H4. Yeah, H4 was the one.
Mm-hmm.
So, wow. So that's so cool.
So one of the political things about what happened was the board that had been established to give out this prize, they had astronomers, and they wanted some kind of celestial method, like maybe somehow observing the moons around Jupiter, like, because those would establish a precise time that you could measure at from a telescope looking at Jupiter and the moons around Jupiter, and some other things like that. That's what they wanted. They thought there was some kind of natural thing that you could observe. But he eventually was rewarded after the years of political struggle and a lot of frustration. And it was kind of sort of a scandal, kind of a tragic scandal. I really don't like that story very much.
Like he had to fight to actually get the money.
Yeah. So it's kind of like a story of a practical engineering over the theory and what they call artisanal genius. In other words, he was a tinkerer. He played with he played with the metal and that kind of thing, and he was an artisan, and the institution resisted it. So, but more broadly, it kind of marks a turning point, a moment when precise portable timekeeping became essential for global navigation. So navigation is the word of the day, and also commerce, and then the British Empire.
I mean, really, when you think about it, like you're linking into this because like the whole invention of further invention of such precise measurement of time with the pendulum clock, as well as these maritime clocks, is pivotal to the whole development of the British Empire / Europe as a whole, I suppose.
That's what it's the accurate. They weren't just measuring time; they were charting the world.
Like it had much more practical usage. It wasn't just like I can tell time more accurately. Great.
Then came the Industrial Revolution, right?
Okay, sorry. I was just thinking it would be good to do an episode in the future talking about the Industrial Revolution. I was just thinking about that.
that's true. I don't know how sciencey. I don't know how it relates to space. I mean, when we're talking about clocks, well, we are kind of like off of our usual.
No.
We've been
Clocks are
drifting away.
absolutely needed for space. I mean, we're
Yeah,
gonna.
that's right.
All right,
So,
let's bring it back here. So, Industrial Revolution. What happens now? This is like
well,
what?
factories. So people invented the factories, and it required a new kind of discipline. And people need to show up on time because you were working with other people, and time is money, and they needed synchronization, standardization. Clocks left the
Right.
church tower and entered the workplace, and the workers' home. They needed railway schedules. In particular, drove the push for standard time zones because um, like in the 18th, 19th century, when railroads started, different cities had different. They would set their own time. Nobody cared about standard time. They just said, well, it's noon here, and we can divide the day up. But where the sun says noon is varies across a time zone, and so we couldn't. every town every town set its own noon by the sun, and the demands of a railroad network required unified time, and so this was the time. This ended up making time kind of part of your infrastructure. It was disembodied, centralized, and inescapable. You began to see the full consequences of clock time. This is in the 19th century, and life organized by the tick of the clock rather than the season or the rotation of the earth. Bodies trained to move in the rhythm of machines. It was the age of the stopwatch, punch clock, and you punch your clock and you get in. You start your shift. Probably, I've worked jobs where I had a time clock. So timekeeping had become not just a matter of measurement, but a system of coordination and control. And in some respects, it was liberating, and in other ways, I mean, I guess we do feel kind of confined by it. So that's the story of the Industrial Revolution. And
So, at what point do we end up making quartz clocks?
well, pendulums and marine chronometers, marine clocks brought precision to science and empire. The quartz clock brought precision to everybody, right? So the quartz crystal was the method of using a crystal for timekeeping was invented in the 20s, and it was great big devices, very impractical at first, but then more fully developed in the 1930s. The quartz clock is based on a physical principle that certain crystals, especially quartz, vibrate at a consistent frequency when subjected to an electrical voltage, a potential. And this is called the piezoelectric effect. And in fact, it goes the other way. If you mechanically vibrate a crystal, it will produce an electric field, some
electric generators,
and the physics of that is also very, very interesting. It has to do with polarization density of the atoms in the crystal, and maybe for another day. But piezoelectric effect is pretty well understood.
Quartz clocks are related to the how do you say
piezoelectric effect.
Okay. So, what's the history of the quartz clock?
Well, the vibrations can be used to drive. The vibration can be used to drive a tiny little motor and an electronic counter that marks seconds, minutes, and hours. And this is a timepiece that's far more accurate than most mechanical clocks. And it uses a little battery. You don't have to wind it up, and they can be mass produced very inexpensively. The first quartz clocks, as I say, were very large, kind of laboratory devices, but by the 1960s and especially the 1970s, man, I remember TV commercials, for, different watches with a quartz movement and that kind of thing. When in the 70s, so it actually kicked off what's called the quartz crisis. I don't know if that's a Googleable word or not. Quartz crisis. that a lot of the traditional mechanical watchmakers in Switzerland and other countries sort of went into tailspin because these quartz movement clocks made the precision that was available from those high precision mechanical watches obsolete. And suddenly everybody could carry a clock in their pocket or wear one on their wrist that kept better time than the great tower clocks of previous centuries. So anyway, become sort of ubiquitous, invisible, and embedded in our electronics.
Okay,
it's interesting. I wanted to say something. I wanted to say something about wristwatches because there's something that I
do you have
learned.
one?
What?
Do you have one?
No, I have a Fitbit.
Okay, and that what kind of clock is that?
That's it's probably a microchip of some sort, and it probably does have a quartz. Well, probably many clocks in there, but I don't really know. But the wristwatch, do millennials and Gen Zs know what wristwatches are?
What do you mean? People do wear watches these days.
Do they?
Yeah, like smart watches are pretty common.
Oh, okay.
But I know others who do.
No, but I mean a wristwatch. It's like a little watch.
Yeah, you wear it around your wrist.
And you wear it on your wrist, and then every day you have to.
Are you referring to watches that the only thing it does is tell time? Like it's not.
Yeah, and every day you have to like pull the little stem on the thing and turn it to wind it up. You have to wind it up. Okay, so that and then you can push it's a watch. Yeah.
Okay. Do you have one to demonstrate?
I do, but I have to get up and leave the room and come back and get it. I wasn't thinking about that, but you've never really heard of that.
Of course, I've heard of wristwatches.
Oh. Well, I mean, I don't know. I'm a visitor from the 20th century, so I'm a time traveler. I've been visiting from the 20th century, and so sometimes I don't know, what people in this century know and what they don't know. It happens quite often.
All right. Let us continue with. We are going way over time here.
Yeah, but this is so cool, isn't it? I sense you're getting impatient.
No,
right?
I mean, like, all right. So,
all right. Well, anyway, wristwatches had existed in the 19th century, but they were always seen as like something that women would wear, right? But by the time of World War I, soldiers needed a practical way to check the time, like okay, it's time for me to go get killed, right? So soldiers needed coordinating attacks and so forth, and so that's when the modern wristwatch started to appear in the 20th century, and men started to wear them. Used to be like it was almost like a jewelry item, and I suppose it still is, right?
I mean, it's like an accessory these days. I mean, but then nowadays we've reached the stage where anybody has a phone and a computer, whatever else in your car.
That's right.
Like,
we know
like 5 million ways of keeping 5 million. Like every device, it seems, has like a clock on there. Like even your oven, as you notice.
Yeah, even the oven. Yeah. So anyway, so if quartz clocks brought extraordinary accuracy to the everyday world, we have these things called. So I'm going to move on to atomic clocks.
Okay.
Right. So atomic clock took precision to a whole new level, one that borders on the philosophical. Okay. So atomic clocks rely on the motion of natural oscillations of the electron in atoms. Specifically, there's a couple of different kinds of atoms. But cesium-133, there's an isotope of cesium, which is one of the alkali metals. 133. They emit electromagnetic radiation at a highly consistent frequency when they transition between energy states. So it's like 9.2 billion vibrations per second, and that number actually is chosen as the official definition of the second, and meaning that time is now defined by a property of matter, not the movement of the Earth and stars.
Only lose 1 second in 6 million years.
Yeah. So
SG7.
Right.
this atomic clock is located at the National Institute of what, Standards and Time?
They are staggeringly precise. They're all over the world. There's like a consortium, and so the best versions. They would.
What is a cesium atom doing? Like how is that related?
I don't know what is so special about the cesium atom. I do remember reading that at one time, but I've forgotten. I did ask this question at one time, and I've forgotten the answer to why cesium. And it's not just cesium. I think rubidium and some other of the metals have this property.
This hydrogen. I don't know what that means.
And what happens is it uses the electronic structure of the electrons around the atom to be promoted to higher energy levels, and then when it decays back, it will emit radiation at a particular frequency. And then these also involve laser, using laser technology to control and moderate that effect. So the atomic clocks have billionth of a second level errors, and it's critical to the GPS technology.
Okay, before you go to GPS, what is up with this 9,192,631,770 cycles?
It's a magic number that's used to define the second.
So they decided to use the cesium atom cycle, and then they said, okay, the second is defined as this quantity of the cycles in a cesium. Points excited.
Yes, that's right. So and that was about 60 years ago, 50 or 60 years ago. They decided to instead of fooling around, they just decided, all right, let's just call this number the number of vibrations per second, and and from now on, and then that's like a universal standard. Anybody with one of these with cesium-133 atoms and this technology can define the second.
Okay, so so this is an interesting perspective, right? That for most of history and prehistory, time was based on what was observed in the heavens, the astronomical stuff. For a good chunk of it, and then later on, even like the concept of basing off of like a fundamental physics, like that is a new concept here. It's like unit time is now fixed forever because this physical phenomenon, the vibration of the cesium-133 atom, is never going to change, whereas heavenly things, whatever up there, does change. So they're not.
They aren't perfect, and of course, we've known that for thousands of years. That's why we need leap seconds and, leap years and leap seconds and that kind of thing. But so anyway, yeah, that's the answer to that. That's pretty straightforward. So GPS, the global positioning system, is critically dependent upon atomic clock technology. The atomic clocks are located on the satellites themselves and are used to set the code, the frequency of the signals that are being sent. And there's all kinds of interesting things having to do with the technology of GPS. There's another thing called coordinated universal time. So this is like a global time standard. Sometimes you'll hear UTC, and it's maintained by an ensemble of atomic clocks located in observatories all around the world.
And for those watching this live, the UTC time right now, just to a precision level of minute, I guess it's 8:05 p.m.
Yeah, I have discovered that the clock that's distributed on Microsoft's
there's an international consortium which actually manages time, or the measurement of time, I should say.
That's right. Yeah.
ITU.
I have discovered that the clock on the computer is pretty accurate as far as Yeah, that I did some work with International Space Station and having some information about when the when the International Space Station comes into sunlight. When it came into sunlight, the solar arrays started to charge up. So I knew exactly when sunlight occurred in real time from another instrument, and it was and the clock, just the crude clock on the computer was accurate enough be to give me the right time of when that occurred. In fact, there was a major error being promulgated by people at NASA with regard to when they became illuminated, but I never told them about that. So anyway,
The way to go.
so but what's remarkable about all of this story is that we've come from, like, we made notches in bones, you know.
Yeah, if you recall, for anybody who's still paying attention, an hour and a half ago we were talking about notches and bones. Now we're talking about atomic clocks.
So Shen is getting impatient with me. So now it's something that's defined, enforced, and standardized. But that's not quite the end of the story.
No, it's not. Oh, by the way, just the for people who care, it is BIPM. I guess Bureau International des.
Yeah, Bureau.
Monsieur. I don't know French. Forget.
Yeah, it's French. Never mind. You know, we let them. Yeah, we let the French do that for us. You know, because they wanted to make some kind of contribution.
It's what?
Just kidding. Just kidding.
It's actually an international organization. It may be based in France, but you know, we're founded there. But international. It's not. There's not
Bureau International de la Ure.
There's not one country that says this is the time, guys. So this is an international organization, and they set the standards for the UTC times and other measurement units. So, all right. With that said, okay, let's go back to what you were saying, Leonard.
I was going to say the last kind of clock I want to talk about is this thing called nuclear clock. It's all the rage. Okay.
Wait. So we talked about atomic clock, which is not the same thing as nuclear clocks.
An atomic clock is not the same. Atomic clock uses the electrons around the atom, the energy levels of the electrons. The nucleus itself has quarks and hadrons inside.
Right.
And they organize themselves according to energy levels. And those are called isomers. And most of the time, isomeric transitions, where there's a kind of not really very well understood notion about the nucleus itself can go into an excited state, analogous to the excited states that electrons go into. But you know, the forces that are holding the nucleus together have to do with gluons, and the force structure is very much different than the Gauss's law, the electronic charge. Okay, but anyway, we know that they exhibit nuclear excitation, and typically for these isomers in the nucleus, the energies that are associated with those are giga electron volts, or they're in the X-ray or gamma ray range, which we don't know how to make lasers or control that kind of energy so that we can manipulate the nucleus, the metastable isomeric nuclear stages. But there was one exception to this, and that's in an atom called thorium 229, thorium number 229, and this is a rare isotope, and it has metastable isomeric nuclear state. So inside the nuclear, and it's only 8 electron volts, which is in the like high frequency laser range. So it's the lowest known nuclear excitation energy, and this opens up the possibility of interacting with the nucleus directly using laser-based techniques, just like the atomic clock, but at a very deeper level. So why does it matter? Okay, because nuclear transitions are even more stable and more isolated than electronic ones. And this opens up the possibility of creating a nuclear clock that in theory could be more precise and less error prone than any clock we've built so far. And some estimates suggest it could keep time so accurately it would drift by less than a second over the entire age of the universe, right? So,
achieved accuracy to vary around 10 to the negative 18th, corresponding to about 1 second of inaccuracy in 30 billion years.
Yeah. So that's
longer than the age of the universe. Oh my
God.
That's a whole different scale there.
Yeah, I know. So like if you know people who are like really anal about keeping time and that kind of thing, this is the clock for them. Okay. Yeah. So the isomeric state of thorium has been confirmed. This thing they have the latest research is showing that they do know that this state does exist, and they can use laser pulses to kind of excite or extract this nuclear transition. So all of this is all still experimental, but the implications are pretty significant. A working nuclear clock could redefine precision timekeeping. And so it will become a powerful tool for fundamental physics. So we might be able to detect tiny changes in gravity, test whether the fundamental constants of nature, like the fine structure constant or the gravitational constant, are changing, or even serve
about in previous episodes for anyone watching. All right.
Yeah. I think we've talked about all those things, or even serve as a sensor for exotic phenomena like the dark matter. In other words, this nuclear clock would take us beyond just tracking time and bring us closer to measuring the structure of reality itself.
Right these days, by the way.
Yeah.
There's papers being published about it. It's this right now is at the forefront of the next stage of development of measuring time.
You betcha. So that's where it leaves us. So prehistoric scratches on bones that we were talking about 2 hours ago, and clocks that vibrate with the rhythm of subatomic nuclei.
This is what you just said is actually this is interesting. What tested fundamental constants could change.
Yeah,
because we I guess you have to be able to measure time to that precision level to be able to see if the fundamental constants of physics could possibly change over time.
That's right.
Which would
I'm not sure about the details of that, but you could, that it's something that's always been of interest to people, and so it's worth asking these questions: what we've gained, what we've lost, right? So. At one time, time was something that we just experienced, like we were inside of time, right? The stars and life around us. Now we live by numbers, deadlines, alarms, countdown.
Right. This article could be people in your own time could read about this. I'll put it on the chat. This page.
Yeah.
Now, for those who are actually further. Want more in depth, you can find research articles, I'm sure, all of these and how they do all these experiments.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's a bunch of there's some good research papers out there. And no doubt like the next evolution, like this is not over, right? Or is this it? Like with this nuclear clock?
I think that's probably about as I don't know of any other physics that we're going to be able to exploit. Maybe I don't know.
Right.
That's it. That's all I really wanted to say, and I know that was a lot.
I want to go back and answer. Let's see, a question from whomever R&B girl it was from back at 2:41 p.m. So that was approximately half an hour ago.
Yeah,
so that was so, and I didn't want to interrupt our flow conversation, but I said I would get back and answer this question. Do you think different cultures experience time differently, and do you think it affects their lifestyle and values?
I didn't we answer that?
I thought we did historically.
I think we kind of ended. Yeah, certainly different cultures. There's the demarcation between the idea that time progresses uniformly from beginning to the end of time, and then there's the idea that time is fluid, like it repeats, and there's cycles, and there is. I don't think there's any doubt that is a thing, but it's a perspective. So that's determined by how you about experience. Individuals and cultures, how they experience it.
Okay,
That's
glad
the best
that
I can do.
No, I mean that's absolutely.
Thank you for your question.
I think culture is something that permeates all throughout. It's not uh like even now, if you like, depending on your religion or your philosophy, which is frequently heavily tied to your culture, um not always necessarily, but there is that, like, yeah, like the notion of the cyclical nature of time versus the past to future, like an ending date. um I don't know. And it's in the verbiage, the words utilized as well. That's for sure. I was gonna say there's a lot of Chinese proverbs, for instance, that references the past, and so there's a frequent notion of the past being used to relate to the present. I don't know. It's like, yes, like I think the conception of time is heavily dependent on the culture in terms of the language, the philosophies, the religions, whatever else, and it's inescapable. So even if you're not aware of it, the way you speak using a certain language,
Right.
you're naturally relating it to time with that kind of cultural baggage.
But we are different. We are different. I mean, all people all over the world are different today than the people of the 10th century and
Of course.
before, because we do have these mechanical clocks, and we have got with the program, that program, for better or for worse, whatever we've lost, and we have a choice. We don't really have a choice, because that would imply free will, which we know is.
So the last, okay, so we talked about linear and cyclical time quite a bit, but you also say here there's a difference between religious time versus scientific time.
No.
No?
Well, I mean, religious. I mean, science is also a religion. It's one that believes in. We talked about this one time. So science is a religion that has induction as its creed. In other words, what happens? If we observe something and it repeats, we can do the same thing and we get it repeatable. Then that's our faith. So our faith is in that, as Karl Popper had pointed out. But I think I don't want to use I wouldn't say religious exactly. I would say cultural. I mean, it does seem to me, whether you like me saying this or not, it does seem to me that in the 11th century, 10th and 11th century, when these mechanical clocks with that escapement mechanism was developed, that was like awesome. It's like everybody in the monastery said, "Oh, this is great. We know when to get up to bake the bread." We know that, and other cultures, according to Bernard Lewis, at least, there were difficulties with its acceptance in other cultures, particularly Islamic culture. In the Turks, the Ottoman had resistance to bringing these using clocks. They didn't want to use the clock because they thought it was like there was something sinful about it or something. And I get it. I mean, I understand. When the call to prayer comes up, you're using the astronomical views. A star comes at a certain angle, and then that's when you have the time for the call to prayer. And I don't mean to pick on that particular aspect. I mean, but it's just a metaphor for the entire world being connected to time in a way that is organic, as it were. Whereas in medieval Europe, I mean, they had, and of course they were also a legacy from the Roman Empire, right? So we didn't talk about Rome. We could have, but that would be another.
That'd be
half hour or so.
I know. This is already like almost 2 hours.
Yeah, we better wrap it up, okay? But that, so
I would. Okay, so I want to. There was Anecdote. I mean, there's a lot of anecdotes about time. One of the ones that my mom liked to throw at me. She loves throwing Chinese proverbs at me.
I'm
Most of
sorry.
which she thinks I already know, and then she realizes I actually don't know, since it's not like I mean, most like grew up here, so it's not like I know all the words she knows. But one of the ones that she taught me that I do know is 一寸光阴一寸金，寸金难买寸光阴. Kind of has a little flow to it, and it basically means an inch of time. I like the quote a lot. Inch of time, an inch of gold, but an inch of time can't be purchased by an inch of gold.
Oh,
So it's actually a really it's a good proverb. It's basically saying, like both are valuable, right? Time and money, but money can't buy time, essentially.
yeah.
So, but yeah, so for us, human existence, once time goes by, it's not like we can go back and retrieve some more of it. At least we haven't figured that out yet.
Terrific.
So
we better wrap it up, Shen.
One other thing I was gonna say, there is this artist, local Houston artist. I'm actually gonna possibly go there after this, and she makes here, I'll just share this real quick. She makes butterfly clocks. Do you see that? These are like, there's actual butterflies that she takes.
Oh, I love it. Yeah.
These beautiful clocks. So I met her at Sawyer Yards, which is one of the largest art studios places in the country, I would say.
Yeah, Sawyer Yards. I know about it.
And like, look at all that. Like, these are real butterflies, and then it's preserved, and then she turns them into like
real butterflies that she killed.
Well, no, like they were already killed. They were already dead. Like, it's not like
they were already dead after she put them in the killing jar.
Oh my gosh. Well, that would be really cruel. I'm pretty sure
they're gorgeous. They're just insects. Yeah. They aren't conscious of anything. They just are mechanisms that respond to their environment. And they're beautiful, and I'm all about this. This is.
I mean, I find it beautiful. I would get one of these clocks if
I would
had enough space.
I might go. She has a gallery down there.
Yeah, right there, 2000 Edward Street.
Okay, I know where it is.
Yeah, like Cassandra.
Yeah.
Butterfly Designs, bluebutterflydesigns.net is the name.
Yeah.
And she makes artwork too. I mean, I'm just showing the clocks because I thought, like, making unique clocks, that's really interesting. We have a artist here that does it.
Absolutely. Wonderful. That
I apparently, like, I think the Houston Museum of Natural Science, that butterfly exhibit thing over there.
Oh yeah, I hadn't thought about that. I haven't been in there in a long time. Yeah.
I think they have some of her works. I think that's what she told me. But anyways.
Well, so, maybe that's where she gets her butterflies. Maybe that's where she gets her dead butterflies.
Oh my god.
Okay. I guess she's not going to be a sponsor or anything, huh? So.
Oh goodness.
I'm just kidding. Okay, they're butterflies.
I mean, I've been I have like this this beetle necklace, right? And this is slightly unrelated, but my point is, whenever I see an artwork that has like or jewelry that has bugs in there, I always want to make sure, like, I ask the artist or craftsperson, like this, you didn't just kill this bug, right, to make this, and
what do they say? They say, well, of course I did, No. I raise them in a little farm, and I fatten them up, and then every day I feed them at the same time, and then one day I go and get them and put them in the killing jar.
Oh my gosh. No, the normal response I get is no, they die naturally and we just reuse them. So
I'm like, of course. Okay. I really am just kidding.
Okay. Good. All right. This has been good. We've touched a lot of things, I feel like. And we cover like over 8,000 years in the span of just 2 hours. I feel like that's
I mean, so that that's very productive. We're being very productive with our time here. So anyway, I hope people enjoyed that, and I did put kind of some work into that as well, and so I hope people enjoyed it. And
Yeah,
like, subscribe. I think there's a bell on YouTube. I think there's like a little bell involved where you can click on the bell and then it'll it'll feed you and then you'll salivate. Like whenever you hear the bell, you'll salivate. Like yeah, like no, that's not what that bell does. That bell tells you that there's going to be we're going to have another show.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
It's not Pavlov talk, you know.
Leonard humor is, you know, it's on a different level today, in a good way. So, with all that said, we got to wrap this up. For today, we're not gonna. We've already covered enough.
Shalom.
We will say shalom, good evening, or wherever you are. Good afternoon.
Good evening. Good afternoon.
So
good morning.
We will be back next time. Be sure to like, subscribe, share. As noted, if you've noticed the ticker at the bottom,
bell.
You can go to patreon.com/SG2 on space to also follow us there, or to offer any donations that you see fit. So with all that said, we will see you guys next time.
And thanks for stopping by.